Hey everyone, it's Alex from Alex and Books, and you're listening to The Reader's Journey, the podcast that takes you on a journey to meet amazing authors, discover brilliant books, and learn valuable lessons along the way. Now, let's get started. Hello everyone, my guest today is Hassan Osman, author of Write Your Book on the Side. Hassan, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Alex, thanks so much for having me.
So I've known you for a couple months now. I followed you on Twitter and Instagram, and I've read your books, and I know your work. But for listeners who are just discovering you for the first time, could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So let me start with my day job. I'm right now a director at Cisco Systems, where I lead something called the Program Management Office, or PMO, for the Americas. So I basically lead a team of senior program managers that help deliver projects and programs for Cisco's customers. I do have to say that views are my own and not those of Cisco. So always a caveat there. But then for my evening job, I guess, or slash weekend job, I shouldn't call it a job. Maybe it's more of a hobby. Is that I write short books for busy managers. I also publish short courses for busy managers, basically, middle-level managers in Fortune 1000 companies, those that need a little bit more help and insight into how to manage their teams a little bit better, how to coordinate with remote employees, how to communicate over email, and that sort of thing. So it's sort of a fun hobby of mine, if you will.
Totally, it sounds like you have a lot going on there. And you mentioned that you write books for busy managers. What inspired you to go to a different category and write a book for that inspires writers?
Yeah, it was really the number one question I got from a lot of people who were like, well, wow, you work a full-time job, so you're not a full-time author, and you've published all those little books on the side. How do you do that? Right. And honestly, I got sick of answering that over and over. I was like, you know what? Maybe I should write a book about this. And, there's a specific target audience where you've got a lot of full-time employees who've, dabbled with the idea of writing a book on the side. And so I was trying to search for a resource that's published that I can direct them to, but I couldn't find something that reflected my own experience in a very compressed way, right? Step by step, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to focus on, what platform to choose, because there's just a ton of questions that new authors might have. And I put those together in a short book called Write Your Book on the Side, published it. And by the way, just as a side note, it is now, when it was published, it was basically a paid book, right? It was something you can buy on Amazon or other platforms. But today it's 100% permanently free. You can grab it on Amazon. You can also grab it on Gumroad as well. No strings attached.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, so if anyone's listening, definitely it's a great book, and if you get it for free, that's definitely highly recommended. So for people out there want to write their first book, you mentioned early on in your book, what's the one thing that matters when it comes to writing a book?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, Alex. So there's really, for those who are listening right now, there's really just one and only one thing that matters about writing a book, and that is your reader, right? In other words, it's your customer. It's someone who finds your book on Amazon or any of the other platforms and buys the book with the expectation that they will get more value from it than the amount of time and money they paid for it, right? It's very, very simple. And everything else is secondary. Everything, I usually say to new authors that, hey, don't worry about your reviews. Don't worry about the cover design. Don't worry about the sales. Focus mainly on your reader, because ultimately that is what's going to matter. And I have what's called this rule number one that I always follow and I use as my North Star. And that is to write a really, really useful book, right? That's it. Very, very simple rule. And again, I use this as my sort of guiding North Star whenever I write any of my books.
And totally, yeah. And just to add on that, yeah, in the book you mentioned, make it helpful, make it short, and make it well written. And those are like three traits every great book has.
Exactly. And let me harp on that a little bit, because I think it's important for your listeners to hear that. So what I mean by make it useful is that you want to address a pain point. Particularly, we're just talking about nonfiction here, right? I don't have a lot of experience in the fiction world, but from a nonfiction standpoint, you want to think about addressing a pain point for your readers, right? And always ask yourself this question: how will my reader's life improve after they read my book? And if you can clearly articulate that, then you're on the right path. So that's the first thing, making it helpful. The second is to make it short. And what I mean by that is try to make it as short and concise as possible because people these days don't have a lot of time to sift through a 700-page book,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yep.
People don't have a lot of time to read,
Mm,
and you want to take out any fluff that's artificial just for the sake of saying you have, a 400 plus page book, right? So make your book long enough to get your point across, no more, no less. So that was the second thing, making it short. The third is to make it well written, right? So write it well. And that does not mean it has to be worthy of a Pulitzer Prize, right? You don't have to be perfect with everything. It just means that you give it your own best. So, of course, things like grammar and spelling, those are really important, but you should really go above and beyond as a writer and make your book a great experience for your readers and not just sort of slap something together for the sake of saying, hey, I wrote a book, right? So that sort of encompasses rule number one. Again, that's write a really, really useful book, and it's about making it helpful, making it short, and writing it well.
yeah, I think that's a perfect North Star for people to follow. Yeah, when I was reading your book, I noticed all 3 points came up, and I'm like, it's no surprise why this book is so good because you follow your own guidelines, and it was a great read.
I tried to stick to that. I mean, that again, that's sort of if I can tattoo it on my forehead, I would.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone that's writing a book should get that tattoo. But you mentioned, I think you're up to like 6 books now, if not more. How many books have you written so far?
Yeah, I'm up to eight. So one thing I didn't mention is I also write. So I'm married. I have two little girls, and every year we travel. This was pre the COVID-19 days, but we usually stop somewhere in Europe for a couple of days. And we've done Rome, Paris, and London. And so I wrote this travel series. Rome in a weekend with two kids. Paris in a weekend with two kids, and London in a weekend with two kids. So it's sort of like a side hobby. But those are truly just from a pure self-serving, hey, I want to put something out there perspective. It's not so much something I spent a lot of time on. It's just a fun thing for me and just for my kids when they grow up. But I don't, focus a lot on marketing them and or advertising them that much.
Got it. Well, I mean, you've written books for, busy managers. You've written this book about writing. You've written books about traveling. I think the one secret everyone wants to know is like, how do you make time to write these books while you're also working a full-time job? Like, what's the secret?
Yeah, I can talk for hours here, so I want to make sure that I give your readers some tangible advice. Let me start with a big one, and that is to force a block of time. And what I mean by that is you want to set some time aside. I usually shoot for 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week to write my book, right? And that's because no matter what type of job you have, anyone can find 30 minutes a day, right? Even, overworked full-time parents, you can either wake up a little bit early or go to bed a little bit late, or even have a shortened lunch at work, right? And you can, if you want to, split the 30 minutes a day by writing like 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night if you have to. But I think by forcing a block of time, you are going to get into this mental habit of writing, and you're going to keep the momentum going. So even if you open your laptop or you're writing on a piece of paper and you stare at that for 5 minutes straight and you've got writer's block, it's still a good idea to kind of focus during that time on writing and thinking, because over time you are going to get that done, right? And I do want to separate that from some advice that's out there, which works for some people, but not so much for me, and that is to set a daily word count. So some authors advocate that, hey, write 500 to 1,000 words every day, and you'll get into that habit. For me personally, that didn't work. It's just because I felt like I was well, first of all, it made me really anxious. Like I don't want to get stressed out about, hitting a specific goal. But second of all, I had sort of I kind of felt it was very artificial in the sense that I needed to pump out words just for the sake of saying I met that goal. So forcing a block of time instead of a daily word count actually helped a lot in moving forward. And this is the process I follow to this day.
Mm. Yeah, just speaking from personal experience. Yeah, the word count thing didn't work for me either because you're just typing like filler words just to meet the count. But what actually worked was just setting aside, like, hey, I'm going to write from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. and just spend that whole hour writing whatever I can, as much as I can.
Right. And by the way, on that note, um, if you and I usually advocate 5 days a week instead of seven. So I usually take the weekends off, or if I'm writing on the weekends, I take, Monday and Wednesday off. If you do the math, 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day, translates to 2.5 hours a week, right? So some people usually ask, well, could I just sort of block half a day or 3 hours on a Saturday morning and write just once a week? And I strongly recommend against that, because going a full week without writing will make you lose momentum and you'll eventually give up, right? So the idea again behind writing consistently 5 days a week is to kind of keep your creative juices going, and thinking about your book as you're moving along.
Yeah, totally. I found the same habit. Like, you want to write just a little bit each day, keep that momentum going. That way, the next day you know where you left off, and you could just keep the story flowing. But if you take like a week off, it's gonna be hard to like hop back on that train.
Exactly, exactly. I mean that's just a couple of pieces of advice. I mean, there's a lot more. One of them is forgetting fancy tools. So a lot of people want, think about, all right, do I need to download Scrivener? Do I need to download this note-taking app? And I've written 8+ books so far, and I can tell you, I only use Microsoft Word. Like, that's it. You don't need any fancy tool as long as you know how to use like headings and subheadings in Microsoft Word or any other tool, whether you're a Mac user. Uh, that it's good enough, right? So don't worry so much about spending the time and money on some fancy new tool that's out there.
Yeah, totally. I started with Google Docs, and then once I learned that you go to the Word doc to do the formatting, I just switched to Word, and it's just been a piece of cake ever since. Like, you don't need any fancy tools to write.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, and Google Docs works great as well if you're working collaboratively with someone, and maybe even an editor. It kind of helps a little bit with the workflow as well.
Mhm. So let's say you set that time for writing, but you encounter a writing's block. Like, what has worked in your experience?
Yeah, that's a big one. Fantastic question. So my philosophy on that is don't fight it. Accept the fact that nearly every single writer is going to get writer's block, right? And this is the idea that you're just completely stuck and unable to continue writing. And what I try to do is work with it. So when I'm unable to proceed or think about writing, then I start doing something else, but that is related to my book, right? So I either conduct more research, maybe I revisit my outline or edit some of my previous work. So it's totally okay to take some sort of break from writing as long as you keep the momentum going, right? So that's my biggest takeaway. It's like, don't just say you don't want to touch your book whatsoever. It's, well, stay in the zone of thinking about it, but just maybe take a break from writing as a function.
Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice. Like, you don't always have to be writing, but as long as you're moving the ball forward and getting your book one step closer to getting published, that's definitely the direction you want to move into.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think you make this excellent point, and one that I struggled with, and I'm sure a lot of early writers struggle with too, is that you want to separate writing from editing. Can you expand a bit on that?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the best pieces of advice I got about writing. I can't remember which book I read it in, but I used to sort of waste a lot of time writing sentences and then editing them over and over until I was satisfied with them. But then I realized that that strategy was very demotivating because I could never get a lot of work accomplished. And I learned that the best authors out there separate their editing from their writing. And what that means is you spend some time. So, for example, I write 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So I'd say, let's say on a Tuesday morning, I would spend the 30 minutes doing nothing but pure writing. So I would kind of throw down all my ideas by giving out, spilling out my thoughts. And I didn't care about grammar. I didn't care about spelling. I didn't care about content mistakes or flow or anything like that. So I would just sort of keep going. And if I made a mistake, I didn't stop to kind of edit it or clean it up, right? But then the following day, let's say on a Wednesday morning, I would spend those 30 minutes looking over my draft and editing and rephrasing and moving things around, right? So that was the time I spent on editing. And that helps because when you look at things from a fresh eye, the next morning, you are going to be a lot more efficient and effective on what you wrote the previous day. You know, a lot of it's going to be garbage, but that's okay, right? Only you are going to see that.
Oh yeah, I could definitely relate to that. Every time I usually write at night, and then whenever I'm writing, I usually feel like, wow, this is like a masterpiece right here. And then I look it up the next morning. I'm like, oh, it's not as good as I thought.
Right, there you go.
And I just wanted to highlight this quote from your book because I thought it was so important. The key thing to remember is that the first draft of anything is going to be horrible, and that no one is ever going to read it. So give yourself permission to be imperfect. And I think that quote speaks so loudly to what the Hemingway said, where it's like I write one masterpiece, one page of a masterpiece for every 90 pages of crap. And
Right.
it's okay for your first draft to be horrible because no one's going to read it. And it's just like a stepping stone. Like that's not what you're publishing. So you just got to give yourself that permission that, you know, the first thing you write is not going to be the best thing. And that's okay.
Absolutely. And you know, a lot of people struggle with that. It's hard for them because as they're sort of typing out their thoughts on the screen, their first sort of thing that they think of is that this is in public, right? This is something that everyone's going to see and they're going to attack it or they're going to critique it. And, you know, you're not sort of, so it's sort of very, what's the word, debilitating, right? It kind of just doesn't help you move forward. But yeah, I mean, it's your own secret journal. No one's going to see it. And just again, you know, to your point, just give yourself permission to and maybe just understand or accept the fact that this is going to be horrible as the first draft, right? When you really understand and believe that, it's going to make life a little bit easier from an apprehension standpoint.
Totally. What are some other common mistakes you see from people writing their first book, and like what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, you know, the biggest mistake is that authors pick a topic that doesn't have a market for it. So let me kind of take a step back and give you my general advice about if someone is interested in writing a book and they don't know what they want to write about, or they have an idea but they're not sure if this is the right idea. I ask them to look at this from a high level and think about three mandatory, I call them circles because it's like a Venn diagram and they intersect, and then a couple of optional ones. So let's talk about the three mandatory circles. Those are interest, experience, and market. And what I mean by that, by interest, is that pick a topic that you're interested in, right? Something you don't have to be absolutely in love and passionate about, but something that, you know, gets your juices flowing, right? You want to make sure that you're writing about a topic that excites you on some level. So that's the first. The second is experience. So you also want to pick a topic that you have some sort of experience in. Obviously, because readers want to learn from someone who's got a little bit more experience than they do, but also because it's a credibility indicator, right? People want to buy a book from someone who's a quote unquote expert in the field, and expert doesn't necessarily need to mean that you're like the top 1% in that field. It just means that you know a little bit more, or you've spent some time more than the average person out there, right? So the first was interest, the second is experience, the third is market. And and this to me is the biggest and most important parameter in this equation. A market means that you need an active buy sell market in the topic of your book. And you know, we can spend hours talking about this, maybe on a future episode of the Reader's Journey. We can talk a little bit more.
Totally.
But you know, finding a market means that you want to make sure that people are buying books in the space that you want to write about. Now, there are many ways you can sort of assess that, but a quick hack for you is that look for, you know, around 5 maybe books about the topic on Amazon that have 15 or more reviews each, right? That's sort of a quick litmus test to let you know if there's a possibility of an active buy-sell market. And by the way, I've done a mistake where I kind of knew that, and I researched Amazon, and there was only like one book about the topic, and I went ahead and wrote one anyway, and it flopped, right? It didn't do so well. So that was, you know, on me for not following my own advice, but it just reinforces the fact that you want that to happen. So those 3 things, interest, experience, and market, are the intersection of all 3 is a topic that you want to go for. Now, those are the mandatory ones, right? I don't think you should break the rule on any one of those 3. There are a couple of other circles, if you will, that are optional, and those are job-related and evergreen. So let me talk about both. Job-related means if you are an entrepreneur today, a business owner, or you are an employee, I highly recommend that you also pick a topic that is related to your industry or your job. And that's because it has this sort of X factor, right? This sort of explosive factor for advancing your brand, your credibility, maybe opening up a lot of potential opportunities in terms of speaking or consulting or even selling other products. And the reason why is because a book is like a business card on steroids. So if you're an accountant, for example, and you write a book about accounting principles, then think about the opportunities that this is going to bring you by, again, whether in conferences or even a promotion in your current job, or even establishing credibility for your business that, hey, so and so is an author and she's an accountant at this large firm. That's going to sort of give you an additional bump there. Whereas, let's say you're an accountant, but then you write a children's book, you might have the interest, experience, and market for that, but you might not be you might not gain the advantages of speaking and what have you, right? So that was the first optional one, job related. The second and final one is pick an evergreen topic. So an evergreen topic that doesn't expire or has the shelf life of a banana, right? Like in 3 months, this topic, let's say, one topic that comes to mind now is like TikTok. If you want to teach people how to use TikTok videos and what buttons to press, the interface might change in 5 months, right? You kind of have to go back and rewrite it and add in new screenshots. Whereas if you write about, let's say, management, right, or you write about reading, that is sort of an evergreen topic that people are going to want to learn about 3 years from today as they would today.
Totally.
So I know a very long-winded answer for you, Alex, but that's sort of the big picture.
No, it's totally wonderful advice. I think C.S. Lewis had a quote. He said, "The more updated a book is, the sooner it'll be outdated."
Yeah, there you go. I haven't heard that before, actually. That's a good one.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to the marketplace thing because just like you mentioned, it's one of the most important parts. And when I was reading your book, I love this piece of advice. Is when you mentioned look at the negative Amazon reviews, not just the positive ones when you're writing your book. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. So actually, when you check for a book on Amazon that's in the same or similar space to the topic that you want to write about, you can gain a lot of insights and research from the reviews that are out there. And you can use those as market data to improve your own book, right? And you can learn from both positive reviews and negative reviews, right? So let's start with the positive. So positive reviews, you can learn a lot about what people find helpful, right? So look for trigger phrases such as, hey, the best thing about this book is, dot, 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 right? And you can really pick up a lot of different, maybe even subtitles, or not subtitles, I should say, chapters or chapter headings from those reviews as well, right? It's like, well, if you haven't thought about this and someone found this particular takeaway from this book as very positive, then maybe you should embed it or include it in your book. Now, with the negative reviews, you can really learn a lot about what people found disappointing, right? And if, you can look for some phrases such as, hey, this book wasn't helpful for the following, or this book lacked the following, then you can use that and address it directly with your own book before you start writing it.
Yeah.
Right.
I love those pieces of advice when I was reading your book, and that's what I'm actually doing now for my next book. Is I'm looking at the reviews, both positive and negative, to see like what do people like, what do people not like, and it's wonderful market research that's out there for free. So I highly recommend people to use that strategy.
Bingo. And that's the key word, right? It's free. It's available. You only have to spend the time and effort into it, but it's all there. And those, by the way, are people who bought a book in your space, so they might be perfect customers for you down the line.
Totally. And so you've written several books and you're still working full time. And I think this goes back to the phrase that, authors is a hard way to make a living, but there are a lot of perks for writing a book. Can you cover a few of those?
Yeah. So let's start with brand and credibility, right? I think, again, I mentioned this earlier, a business card on steroids. I think having a book out there is just a door opener for so many different things that you might come across. Here we go. I'm on this podcast with you, right, as a guest, The Reader's Journey, because I wrote a book and you read it, you found it helpful, and you kindly reached out. I mean, it's just, the amount of connections you can make and the opportunities that can open up for you are just limitless. So that's the big sort of overarching reason. But then there's a lot of others, right? You get potentially promoted in your current work because you stand out from your peers. You get additional business from prospective clients. You get asked for potential opportunities with coaching or consulting. So there are many, many reasons why you should write your book. But I always use this phrase that I stole from Gary Vaynerchuk, and that is that legacy is more important than currency, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people focus on the money aspect, which is good. And don't get me wrong, I think that's it's always great to kind of make some money from side projects. I call what I do a cash flow positive hobby because it's something I enjoy doing and it makes some money on the side. But if you're focused on the money and not on the legacy aspect, right? Because writing a book is this amazing experience where you're putting a piece of your thoughts out there in the world, and that book is going to outlast your time on Earth, right? You're going to want to make sure that whatever you're putting out there is something you're proud of and something that maybe your kids or your grandkids or their grandkids are going to read about you in the way you thought. So I think that is really important, and how you sort of frame this and think about it. But if we want to talk, maybe because money is a big topic for a lot of people there, it's always something people are curious about, and I usually address it first thing in my courses and my book as well. And that is, when you're thinking about the income aspect of it, keep in mind that writing a book has the perk of being passive income, right? So you don't need to be involved in the sales process, particularly with Amazon. So they do everything for you, right? They host your book, they distribute it to your readers, they handle payments, returns, customer service. They even market your book for you through the organic search engines if you know how to tweak that a little bit. And the best thing of all is that your book is part of an infrastructure that is ready for a sales spike due to an event that happens months or years later on. So I'll give you an example. And this is a fresh example because I was literally just looking at some of my stats this morning. So I wrote a book called Influencing Virtual Teams. I wrote it back in 2014, so it's nearly 6 years ago. And that book luckily hit the number one bestseller. It was doing really well initially, but then of course, just relying on Amazon's organic sales, it was doing around a couple of $100 a month. So not too much, right? But then COVID hit, and a couple of months ago, because my book was about virtual teams and how to manage remote employees without doing any advertising whatsoever, without doing any sort of mentions, it just exploded. And it went from a couple of $100 a month to over $2,000 a month.
Whoa.
And that was, I mean, I was very fortunate, right? But the idea is that I didn't have to put any additional incremental effort into that book. It's just sort of an asset that you have sitting out there, and a spike, maybe a mention by someone who's famous, or something happens in the world that this topic becomes hot, and you automatically gain the benefits for that. So think about it that it's passive in the sense that you start building those and you don't have to spend a lot of time marketing them. And then finally, when I talk about the money, I always say that you're probably going to make more money because of your book than from your book. And yeah, right. So that, what I mean by that is, your book's royalties are one thing, right? You could get lucky and hit it big and start making quite a significant income from it. But the probability of you making more money because of it, right? Because of your business card on steroids effect, whether it's through speaking engagements or consulting gigs, or a new job or a promotion, those have a much higher monetary value associated with them than the direct book royalties, right? So the return on investment, if you're listening out there and you're interested in writing a book, the return on investment is 100% worth it, right? So go for it.
Yeah, totally. I love the fact that you basically write it once and then you could sell it forever, and it's just kind of passive income. And then yeah, it opens so many doors. Like that writing this book has helped me actually get authors to come on my podcast. And yeah, I haven't made a ton of money for it, but I'm just happy to have something creative, to have done something creative and just have it out in the world. And like you said, legacy is more important than currency.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's also kind of fulfilling a personal goal. I mean, I know a lot of people who don't want to do it for the money or the network effect. They just want to do it for that self gratification, and that's okay too, right?
Mm.
And it definitely helps with that.
Mm. So let's say someone's written their book, they have it ready to go. Could you kind of explain what is Amazon KDP? Because I actually didn't know what that was until I read your book.
Yeah, so KDP stands for Kindle Direct Publishing, and this is Amazon's self-publishing arm. So if you want to publish a book today on Amazon, it is a super simple process. All you need is 20 minutes of your time, and you need a fully formatted book manuscript. So your book should be formatted properly according to Amazon's guidelines.
Mm.
Again, Microsoft Word works, and that's it. 20 minutes of your time and a manuscript in Microsoft Word. The optional thing is a cover design. So you can hire someone to design a cover for you, but even if you don't want to do that, you can basically use Amazon's KDP built-in cover creator, and you can create one in 30 seconds. I don't recommend you do that, and I get into the reasons in the book. But that's sort of how simple it is. You only need your manuscript. And all you need to do is sort of fill in some information, your title, your subtitle, some keywords, your description, your distribution rights, and so on and so forth. And then Amazon says within 72 hours, your book would be available for sale on the platform. With my books, it's always been around 3 to 5 hours. So that's how quickly it is to publish the book. And of course, I missed saying that you set the price of it as well. So you get to choose the price point for your book, and you sit back and collect the checks, assuming your book is doing well, right? But that's basically it. It's just a simple platform where your book would be available on Amazon.com, as well as all the other Amazon international sites as well. So the UK one, the India one, and a few others. In addition to that, so that's the ebook version. KDP also allows you to leverage what's called print on demand or publish on demand. And that is that you can just sort of format your book and leverage the publish on demand feature, where if someone wants to buy a print copy for your book, a paperback copy, when they purchase it is when Amazon prints it. So the cool thing is that you don't need to sort of print 1,000 copies and have them sit in your garage and then sell them online. Amazon does all that for you. So someone buys it, they print it and send it within 2 days, which is amazing too, because a lot of my sales are still people that prefer reading hard paperback copies than the digital ebook versions.
Totally, yeah. It's great to have the books on demand. And yeah, I'm even getting requests from people asking, like, when's the physical copy going to be out? So it's amazing that Amazon does all that work for you.
Yeah, it's seamless too. I mean, you only need to format. So there's just a little bit of a tweak compared to the ebook, where you also have to design the full cover. So unlike the ebook, where you only need the sort of one image file for the front cover, with the paperback version, you have to design a spine, the back cover, and the front cover as one file. So that usually takes a little bit more effort. You can't do that for free on Amazon, so you would have to hire a designer to help you out.
Totally. And so not only have you published several books on Amazon, but a few of them have actually become Amazon #1 bestsellers. And you actually talk about how to do that in your book. So I wonder if you could, share the secret with us.
Yeah. So first of all, let me explain what that is, right? So being an Amazon #1 bestseller means that your book is listed at the highest ranking spot in a specific category on Amazon. And let me kind of share a little secret with you. Getting listed as an Amazon #1 bestseller is way, way easier than most people think. Okay. If there was an article, this was several years ago, it was a magazine called The Observer. And there was someone who, to prove how easy it was to kind of game the system, he kind of just took a picture of his foot and he created like a 2-page book about it. It was literally empty on the inside. And he published it for sale on Amazon, and then he asked a couple of his friends to buy the book, and his book became a #1 Amazon bestseller after only like maybe 3 or 4 sales. And he invested like 5 minutes in the book, and only $3 or $4 because he gave those to his friends to buy the book, right? So it's not that hard. Now, of course, the book was taken down by Amazon. I mean, they usually clean a lot of this stuff up. You can't really have that for a long time, but That's one thing. So it's fairly easy. A second is that, having a number one Amazon bestseller status doesn't really translate into a lot of sales in the long run.
Mm.
I know this for a fact because I've been on the Amazon bestseller list 4 times, and although my books did fairly well when they hit the bestseller status, it's not like it's going to stay like that for a year and a half, right?
Mm.
So it's something to keep in mind. Really, the only advantage is that it's a credibility indicator, right?
Mm.
It's definitely great to kind of be acknowledged by Amazon, and you sort of get that number one Amazon bestseller orange banner next to your book,
Mm.
and it definitely helps, right? You can use that as a vanity metric, and ultimately it doesn't hurt to have a number one bestseller associated with your book. Now, to answer your question, how does your book become an Amazon number one bestseller? Well, the key is a couple of things. One is you want to list your book in a low competition category, right?
Mm.
So that's the first thing you need to think about. And the second thing is you need to think about something called sales velocity. And what that means is you want to get a high number of sales in a very short period of time.
Mm.
So if you do those two things, low competition category and get a large number of sales in a short period of time, you're going to get the number one Amazon bestselling banner if you hit a certain threshold. Now, we can spend an hour kind of talking about that, but we're probably not going to get into the details. But to know how to get a low competition category, you need to do a little bit of legwork. So there's something called the Amazon Bestsellers Rank, or ABSR. That is the public rank of a book on Amazon, meaning how many books they sell. And for each book and category, you can start looking at the number one Amazon bestselling book in that category and look for one that doesn't have a very high ranking, right? So looking at 20,000 or 25,000 or above is something what you want to shoot for. And then for sales velocity, you need, on the day you publish your book, list it for a very low price. I go with 99 cents because that's the lowest price you can set on Amazon. And then ask as many people and followers and friends to buy the book on that day. And using that model, you should be able to hit it.
Well, we're going to see a lot more niche bestsellers come out from whoever's listening to this podcast because, that's great advice for anyone.
Yep. Very easy to do, but you also have to spend a lot of legwork researching and making sure you get those sales.
Yeah. So although this isn't covered in the book, I'd like to talk about Gumroad, which is like a digital online platform that we both use, and just kind of compare like the pros and cons versus like Amazon, publishing on Amazon or publishing on Gumroad.
Yeah, this is very timely, Alex. Thanks for asking the question because I'm literally in the middle of writing a post comparing Gumroad versus Amazon KDP. And there's a TLDR version, right? Too long didn't read version to this. So I'll give you that. If your focus is on maximizing the amount of money you make and you don't have or you don't mind babysitting your book, and by babysitting I mean heavily marketing it yourself, tweeting about it on Twitter, asking people to purchase it, and also handling things like customer returns, refunds, for example. If you don't mind doing that, then Gumroad is hands down the best platform for you. Mm-hmm. But if you are someone like me, a writer on the side, I don't have much time to kind of market a lot of my books. Yes, I do care about the money, but it's not like a primary driver. To me, it's more of again, a business card out there. And I'd rather sort of take a 3-week vacation and not worry about organic sales and more of a credibility and distribution indicator, right? So Amazon, keep in mind, is like 85% of the market. So if you have it there, nearly anyone in the world can have access to it through their platform. That's not to say Gumroad doesn't have that as well, but it's just sort of the organic search engine is way more powerful than Amazon as a first-time author is your go-to platform, right? So pros and cons with both. I've recently started using Gumroad for my virtual teams building book, and within a month, I've got a couple more days before the month is over, but I made over $3,000 in sales. Whoa. That's never happened with any book on Amazon. So, price point wise, you can increase it. There's just a ton of advantages and control that Gumroad gives you that Amazon does not. And, again, pros and cons for both. But if you're a first-time author, you don't want to worry about babysitting so much, you care more about distribution overall organically, then Amazon might be the start for you. One thing to wrap it up though is you can still publish on both as well, right? There's no reason why you can't go with both Amazon and Gumroad. The only thing you need to be careful about is Amazon would flag your book if the Gumroad price is cheaper. So if your book is $10 on Amazon, but $7 on Gumroad, then using their own algorithms and search engines, they will send you a nastygram and say, this book is is listed for a lower price on another platform. Either reduce the price or we're going to kick you off the Amazon KDP publishing platform.
Yeah, they're definitely living up to that motto of lowest price of everything.
Yep. Yep.
So for people who are listening, you've given a lot of great, writing advice, but some people I'm sure are still like hesitant about writing their book. What one piece of advice would you give them?
Just start. If you start overthinking this, you are never going to get started. To your point earlier, right? Giving yourself permission to write something that's horrible on your first pass is something that's going to hopefully make people who are listening to this take that first step. But don't overanalyze. It's a long journey, right? To write a book, I mean, it usually takes me around 6 months. You can always adjust. It's not like a one-way door, it's a two-way door. So if you write like 15 pages and this is not the direction you're feeling, or this is not the right way, that's fine. Start from scratch, right? But don't sort of get into this analysis paralysis mode where you just continuously push it out until you're in the mood, because you're never going to get there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like you could read all the books and watch all the videos you want, but really at the end of the day, it comes down to actually starting the work and starting your book. And speaking of books, my closing question to all my guests are, what are one or two books that had a huge impact on your life, and how did those books change you?
Yeah, excellent question as well. So, two books. One is The 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. That's a classic. I read it many, many years ago. I think maybe over 10 years ago when it came out. I think it was 2009. I can't remember. But it really made me think about muses, right? It's got me started into writing, got me started into creating courses on the side, and really thinking about business in general in a different way, right? How to sort of come up with an idea for a product, how to kind of sell it. Sort of, you get an MBA, if you will, in small business. So that to me was eye-opening. It's about efficiency, effectiveness, and where you spend most of your time. I, of course, don't work a 4 hour work week today, pretty much 70 hours, but I use the concepts to maximize the amount of time on output that I put in terms of effort. So that was one book. That was an eye opener. Another, and that is more about productivity and efficiency, is Getting Things Done by David Allen. For those of you who don't know, Getting Things Done is like this ultimate productivity methodology or framework that David Allen, who's a New York Times, I think, bestselling author, and was a consultant for CEOs across America, and he developed this method of how to organize both your work and your life by having this system of tools and calendars and so on and so forth. So that was huge as well. So the combination of both 4 hour work week and Getting Things Done has been explosive for me, and I attribute the way I work today, running a full-time job, which is quite demanding, and being able to pump out a book every few months, as well as courses on the side, and running 2 blogs and a podcast to those books.
Yeah, it sounds like you're definitely getting things done.
Yeah.
So Hassan, this has been a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed your book. I'll have everything I'll have the links in the show notes below. But I'm sure people want to learn more about you. They want to follow you on social media. Where's the best place for people to go?
Yeah, so writerontheside.com is my blog and podcast about writing while working a full-time job and publishing. I always publish every couple of weeks an episode. I usually have guests as well on that. And all my social media accounts are on there. I'm on Twitter at Hassan O. And I'm on a couple of other platforms, Instagram and so on and so forth. But you can find everything on writerontheside.com. I even have the link to the Writer on the Side book, Write Your Book on the Side, I should say, on there as well for people to find the link.
And just to add to that, you also have a wonderful podcast, which I would highly recommend people to listen to. Can you just share one or two sentences about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's called Writer on the Side, and that's why I confused it with the name of the book. But that is the podcast I use to help other full-time employees write and publish their first book on the side. So similar to the content that I share in my book and what I shared with you today, it's sort of my own journey on a bi-weekly basis. I publish an episode, either a guest on the show or my own thoughts and latest updates on writing.
Yeah, and I highly recommend people to check out that podcast. And Hassan, I just want to thank you for taking us on a journey on your book, Write Your Book on the Side. Highly recommend to everyone that listening, if you want to write a book or if you're stuck in your writing process, definitely pick this book up. And Hassan, this has been a wonderful conversation. I want to thank you for coming on the show today.
Likewise, Alex. Thanks so much.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Reader's Journey. You can learn more about what was covered in today's podcast in the show notes below. If you enjoyed this podcast, the best way you can support it is by subscribing and leaving a positive review. If you're looking for book reviews and recommendations, head over to alexandbooks.com. If you want to join my reading journey, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at alexandbooks. That's all for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you soon. Read on, everyone.